Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Perspectives. You probably know it's a presidential election year, and violent crime in the U.S., especially in our big cities and metro areas, is getting a lot of attention. Well, one question that many folk are asking themselves is, how safe do you feel in your community? Now, nationally, homicides did surge in some places during the pandemic, even in the rural areas. But new data says that there's an overall drop in killings from 2022 to 2023. And one question that they're asking is about that safety issue, but they're also wanting to know how and where these violent crimes like rape, assaults, and carjackings, how do they rank? Now, every city has a different level of crime, and of course, a recent Gallup poll says that 63% of adults see our country's crime problem as very or extremely serious, and that crime rose in the last year. Now, sadly, though, they don't accept the evidence that shows that murder and violent crime declined, and possibly it was the largest one-year decline ever. Mobile's 2023 numbers fall in line with what's happening nationally. In fact, according to Mobile Police, crime is at a 40-year low in the port city. The city's vision is to be the safest city in America with respect for everyone. Now, Mobile County has been protected by the sheriff's office long before Alabama even became a state or the city of Mobile was incorporated. The county's first sheriff put on the badge when the county was first formed back in 1812. Today's sheriff's office, they use smart crime fighting strategies and technology to address crime. And today, law enforcement nationally and both MPD and MCSO are asking, how do you get the people that you protect and serve to understand and trust the data? Our guest today from the Mobile County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Paul Burch, and from the Mobile Police Department, Chief Paul Prine. After a quick break this morning, we'll talk with our two guests representing law enforcement in Mobile County about the challenges that they and their officers face every day. And do they feel that their policing methods are making things better? As well as how do we get to that ranking of being the safest city and county in Alabama and the nation? Sheriff Paul Burch and MPD's Chief Paul Prine. We'll hear from them when Perspectives continues in just a moment. Welcome back this morning. We've got a lot of folks are probably talking about the two Pauls here this morning, our Sheriff Paul Burch and Mobile's Police Chief Paul Prine. Gentlemen, welcome to the program this morning.
Thank you, Eric.
Does anyone ever say anything about that? We're having our two top law enforcement officers.
All the time.
Okay.
Sometimes I get accused of being him, and I'm sure sometimes somebody will call him me from time to time.
Well, we understand that. I used to be called Bob Grip and Mel Showers.
Okay.
So we understand. Well, listen, this morning we wanted to give you a chance to talk about some of the things that hopefully people are wondering and asking, as well as the things that you all hear constantly as well. First, let's talk about the position. Now, you ran for office and you were appointed for office. How has it been? Is it what you were thinking it was going to be? Of course, you've been around law enforcement all your life and even with relatives, so how is it?
For the most part, it's fantastic. I will say the jail is my nemesis. I did not realize, how much time would be invested in projects at the jail and defending lawsuits from the jail, and but overall, it's been a great experience.
Chief?
Listen, I love the job. I love, being able to move the pieces on the board to do the thing that we swore and took an oath to do for the community. There's a lot of things that come with the job you don't necessarily like, such as the politics and the bureaucracy, but you must find a way to navigate through them things so you can continue to push the mission forward.
Any major surprises for either of you that you had no clue that was a part of it, or you weren't thinking that it was going to be, you mentioned the jail, but anything else that may have come up in the last?
Well, I'll just speak to that.
Okay.
I think I ended with it, was the politics and the bureaucracy. Everybody has an agenda, whether it's elected officials or whether it's those appointees that are in the administration. And sometimes they can appear to be competing interests, but you have to find a way to work through that. And, that's the difference with professionals. But until you take that role, you really don't realize just how prevalent it can be and sometimes difficult to navigate. Yeah.
And does it turn your position into a political office as well? You know, some of the police programs you see on TV,
Yep.
they're like Law and Order, 1 PPD, and people having to deal with those things.
So in my position versus the sheriff here, he's an elected. He has certainly a lot more autonomy than an appointed position does, and we talk about that quite frequently. But in the position I do have, I'm certainly grateful for that position. But it does not come a lot of times with the autonomy that you would expect to have in that position. And I think the challenges are a little bit more difficult, and I think the sheriff would probably agree with that.
Go ahead,
As he said, we do talk often
Okay.
about the two positions and you know the differences and the likenesses. You know, for me, the political part is you know something I've had to get used to as well. Even though it's an elected position, obviously very political, I'm still very much a street cop, at least in my mind. And so that part has been an adjustment, trying to you know be the places I'm supposed to be rather than be out on the street with my guys and so, but you know, occasionally I get to get out there and pretend I'm the police still.
Well, we remember how much you loved it, that's for sure. Well, let's look at some of the things that are going on now. Nationally, a lot of crime reports are coming out. I think before we came on, we were talking about one that they were talking about nationally and looking at information. How do those tie together for you all, being the city and the county? I'm sure, and we constantly see as we cover stories, that you all are interacting one another, helping one another as it relates to different issues that are going on. So when that crime report comes out, is that something that you all sort of discuss or toss around as the sheriff looking at the county and that part of the county, and then of course what you have responsibilities at?
So if you don't mind, I'll say, so as it comes to chasing numbers or you know, kind of chasing down those crime statistics, we don't really collaborate in that regard. That's more of an automated process. I think the sheriff would say dynamics are somewhat different from the jurisdiction of the county. At a local level, not the county, but at the local level, our responsibility is to reduce that crime. And so when we release that annual report card, that really is, in essence, that annual report is a report card of how well we've done compared to the last year. And of course, as you're aware, our report is a 10-year report. And so when we release that, what that tells me is where our challenges are and how do we tweak our plan to move forward. But to your point, the sheriff and I have worked together, and I think here in the very near future, you're probably going to see some more collaboration between the two agencies, and me being able to have access and use his personnel until we can backfill some of the vacancies in the department. And for me, that becomes a force multiplier.
And as you look at that and hear the report that comes out, is it something that you take a glance? Because a lot of times the city border is not a border because it spills over into the county.
Right, and some of the data that you know he is kind enough to send me some of their numbers every Friday, and we look at those and we're able to see where some of those crimes occur and how close they are to that invisible border, because the criminals don't know a border, and if they're committing a burglary in the heart of Mobile today, they're in out in the county tomorrow and float to and from. There's no longer neighborhood groups that stay in their little areas. It is a county-wide problem, and we have intelligence-led data just like they use, and we look at some of their data, compare it to ours, and see where we need to focus our efforts that will ultimately help the entire community, but it helps both agencies.
And you sound like that you can use this data to move forward with progressing in the areas in which you see a shortfall. Is it usually pretty accurate of what you're thinking it is when you get this information? That's pretty much what you thought it was going to be?
Now, for the city, we follow the data literally every day, and our command staff meets once a week to determine what those trends and patterns were. But to the sheriff's point, I think it shouldn't be understated in that what affects the city of Mobile affects Pritchard. It affects the surrounding agencies. It affects the county jurisdiction and vice versa. So there has to be communication and collaboration with all the agencies, but certainly with the sheriff. A lot of people don't realize he has an overreaching and expanded authority over the entire county to include the city and every jurisdiction in the county. And so working and collaborating with the sheriff is important for me, because as I send him that information, he's always responsive. What do you need from me? And I think in part that's why not only have you seen crime reduction is because we have a great working relationship, but I think you're going to also see better things in the way of reducing crime certainly in the next year or two.
You know, it makes me think about in the heat of the night when Chief Gillespie moved to the sheriff's position. Right. He and the new chief had a great working relationship. Right. Yep. And you could see how they were tackling things together.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So that's what's working for us as we look at the numbers that just were released.
It is, and you know, and I'll touch just a little bit on you know, the Pritchard detail we had a few months ago. Mm-hmm. That was totally data driven. You know, and a few complaints from the citizens. But when we deployed those special operations units in there for about 2 weeks, it was during the time where they had shooting after shooting after shooting. Once we did that, there were no shootings for about 2 months. And so, you know, honestly, I can't leave them there every day, all day, but we've gone back periodically and we'll continue to go back and deploy those resources wherever they're needed.
We're getting ready to go to a break here in about 30 seconds. Are things more violent than when you all first joined the staff? Because you were at MPD when you started out also. Yep. When you all first joined the police force, were things as violent as it appears to be today?
Well, I would just simply say I think it is. And of course, numbers, you know, are numbers. I think the difference between whether or not things are more violent than they were then, I think may be exacerbated in many regards due to certainly the onset of social media and where we are today.
I would say that plays a significant factor, but you also, this current generation and culture have no respect for the law, family, or the police, period. And that's just something we've faced, both agencies and all around the country.
Wow. We're going to hold on that one a second and take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk more. Our very special guest today, we have Sheriff Paul Burch and Mobile Police Chief Paul Prine here on Perspectives. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking to our sheriff and our police chief here in Mobile and Mobile County this morning. We were talking about the breakdown of the family structure, and a lot of people talk about that when we're dealing with the school issues, the district attorney's office, along with, of course, the police and the sheriff's department. So when you look at that, how do you combat that? How do you change the area of the community that you really aren't responsible for changing, but yet it affects your job, it affects everybody as it relates to addressing crime and the issue? How do we tackle that today?
Well, again, collaborating with the police department and with other, I guess, social agencies. You know, we went to a roundtable recently at Children's and Women's, and they had some great ideas to kind of put into play. And, you know, but you got to get them young. You know, it's not a popular thing to say, but when you have, say, a 14-year-old who's already been involved in several shootings, you've lost that kid. There's nothing you're going to do to change that. And you have to, that's my opinion, and you have to help those you can help, and those that you can't, you have to lock them up. And it's unfortunate, but when somebody's engaged in that kind of violent activity, you've lost them.
And each of you have dealt with some very young, I guess, can I say, criminals or participants in criminal activity here in recent weeks, where we're talking about a 13-year-old in the county that just did something horrendous. And then, of course, you've had teenagers shooting into cars, into buildings, and killing little ones. And so what do we do to, who is it that we need to talk to?
So I would simply say this: crime is very problematic, but it's also very complex. There's no one thing that's going to fix crime. Crime is a social economic problem, and it usually starts at the bottom of the social economic scale, and that, you know, poverty begets poverty, and there's a mindset with that. The way you get to the kids is first and foremost in the home, but that's the one place that nobody wants the law enforcement officers. We work great hand in hand with the school board, but I really believe that the school gets 30% of these kids' time, And it is there in the school where I think you're going to find our largest and biggest success to be able to interfere with some of these kids' life. And the sheriff's absolutely spot on. By the time they've made it to high school, kids are set in their ways. You've got to get them at the elementary level. We just expect that children understand morality. They understand the position of authority and discipline and morale and things that come with it. But unfortunately, we're living in a society where, as the sheriff stated, there's just a lack of respect for control or authority, whether it's with law enforcement or the school system. And we've got to find a way to mentor these kids and get that information in there. And I don't know that we've tapped into the right program, but we are certainly doing everything we can to partner with a lot of different people and agencies to be able to get into the school system and help these kids.
The community's got to stand up and be a equal partner with you all in this, because it's something that we all are having to deal with. Now, Chief, I don't know how much of you can talk about, but you had 2 grown men recently act up on a place of business where, easily we could have been there ourselves, shopping. And so were they both products of this generational issue, or just how do things like that happen?
I want to be careful to say this. Every violent crime we have, we don't put on the backs, of the young people in our community. The young people and the systemic violence coming from this young group is terrible. But I often say that, the young people are learning what's going on in the home. And then to your point, whether it's that most recent case or any other case where they're not gang affiliates or associates, they're grown people that are doing the very thing we're preaching to the children and the youth of our community, that, hey, you've got to learn conflict resolution skills. You've got to be able to talk things out. And when our adults can't do it, how in the world do we expect our children are going to do it?
13-year-old who did just a horrendous act there, and you're talking about stabbing, setting somebody on fire, and of course their uncle, I think 70 years old, deceased.
That was our first homicide of the year, and again, that's it makes you wonder what has gone on within that home, to have a child have that mindset, and without giving any details of the case, as far as statements and such, there's no evidence of any kind of abuse or any kind of bad home life. So we really don't know what would trigger an event like that, and sometimes you never know.
How do you guys feel about video games?
Well, listen, I grew up in an era of video games, but what countered some of the music or video games coming up, certainly in the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, was counterbalanced by a very disciplined home life and engaged mother or grandparents, certainly in my particular case. Although I think it's bad, and I think it plays a huge perception piece of the young minds of the folks in our community, I'm very cautious not to blame those things, because it still comes back to having that offset or counterbalance of morale and discipline in the home. And I think there in the home is where you find a lot of a lack of love, faith, and discipline. And those things, as I look back over my life, were paramount in making me the man I am today. And unfortunately, we have a group of individuals or community in our home that needs that love, faith, and discipline in its proper form, but it's not there, and that's the one place we can't be.
So we should be careful about if we as parents who are watching today need to make sure that they are part of that structured experience that the child may have with a video game.
Absolutely. I was never a video game type person growing up. I think we did have an Atari that I didn't have a lot of interest in, but my children had video games, but there was a balance.
Right.
I mean, they played a little bit of video games, but they also were involved in baseball, football, other field and all that. They stayed very active with sports. So their video game was, participation was minimal.
Just a part of.
Yeah. We weren't growing up. You weren't allowed inside till street lights popped on.
I remember
You're supposed to be out playing.
Yeah. So as we look and wrapping up here, we talk about people believing our crime reports, the statistics that you all are sharing about your programs are making a difference, but it's not a perfect world. And of course, the media sometimes, I think we're a part of that perception problem,
Right.
to where we put people front and center, and we're starting off every newscast with these stories. But overall, things are down and progress is being made.
Well, I would argue for the city of Mobile, progress is being made. You know, coming off of 2021, we had a high attrition problem. We certainly had the highest year in homicides over a 10-year period at that time. I'm proud to say that we are down in crime by double digits over the last 2 years, 20% down in violent crime, 23% down in overall crime, 40% down if you just take the homicide numbers out. But the other part of looking at crime is not just the data. We are down. The part that we battle and face that's most difficult is that perception of crime and people saying, well, they're manipulating the numbers. Well, we really can't. We report those numbers to the FBI, so those numbers have to be scrubbed and cleaned and validated. And so we do answer to a higher authority, if you will. And I always tell people, the chief of police has one time to lie to the community or his department, the men and women in that department, and once he does that, he or she has lost confidence with both, and that's not a good place for a chief of police to be. But being honest and transparent sometimes doesn't always come off as favorable as the chief as well, because it's honesty.
Sheriff, got about 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll touch on perception. You know, this operation we kicked off this week, you know, that goes toward the perception of our community, visitors who come here, where you go to any public space and have to walk through clouds of marijuana smoke. And I liken it to the broken windows program in New York. It's the little things. If you can tackle the little things, the big things fall in place. And so that's, you know, you're going to see the sheriff's office out there in force addressing these problems. If you see it, call us.
Hate to wrap us up, but thank you both for being here today. And thank you for joining us. And please make sure that you are supporting local law enforcement.